Good evening. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us, for taking the time out of your evening to learn more about the city's effort to maintain the landscaping along city streets in South Melrose and to get your questions answered. We really appreciate you being here. My name is Rochelle Lewis, and I'm a senior engagement consultant with CivicMic. CivicMic is working with the city to help inform and engage residents about your priorities for landscaping services in the community. And tonight, the city's main focus is to provide an understanding of what those services are, how they are funded, and what is needed to maintain them, and to provide an opportunity for you to ask questions. Getting to the agenda, we're going to hear some background information on this issue and an explanation of the challenges the city is facing from Vista Finance Director Mike Sylvia. And we'll hear from Sarah Maras with NBS, a municipal finance consulting firm, to learn about the research they have done regarding the financing of ongoing landscape maintenance operations. This meeting will be recorded and shared on civicmic.com/vista. If you haven't visited that site yet, it's civicmic.com/vista. That's where you can find all the information shared with the community, sign up for updates, share with your neighbors, and learn about next steps. This meeting, along with the slides you'll see presented, will be posted on the site tomorrow, so feel free to visit that and share that around with your neighbors. We will also be hosting an in-person workshop on this topic on Wednesday, February 28th at the Hyatt Place Hotel in Vista on South Melrose Drive. Watch for an invite in your mailbox with the details for that meeting, and it will also be posted later this week on the civicmic.com website. Just a few ground rules to quickly cover before we jump in. We plan to keep the meeting to 1 hour, including questions. We are going to hold all the questions to the end of the presentation. So if you have a question, please make a note of it. We hope we'll answer a lot of your questions just in the course of the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, I will go over, after we're done with all of the presenters, I will go over how we'll go about getting to your questions. To keep background noise down, we ask that you keep yourself muted when you're not speaking so everyone can hear what's being presented. If someone goes off mute who is not speaking, we'll put them back on so everyone can hear the information being shared. CivicMic's work is engaging the public, and we're interested in helping the city hear from all property owners and residents, and we're committed to ensuring a respectful dialogue. So, of course, foul language or personal insults are not acceptable. We've never had to do this before, but in the event there is bad behavior, that person will be moved by the moderator, my colleague John Savage, into a private meeting on Zoom to regain their composure and allowed to return. And if the behavior continues, that person will be permanently removed from the meeting. Of course, this looks like a very friendly group, and we do not expect this to happen, but we say it at the top of every meeting so everyone can be assured this is a respectful forum. And with that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to the Vista City Finance Director, Mike Sylvia. Mike.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Rochelle said, this has been a project in the making for quite some time. So I'm going to go through a few slides, background on the district, as well as financing conditions. And from there, we'll go do the deep dive for the re-engineering with Sarah. So in terms of background, the South Melrose Landscaping District, it's hard to believe, but it was formed 35 years ago in 1989. It has had an annual levy through the current fiscal year of 23-24. That's a three-step process where there's an intent to levy, as well as authorization of annual required assessment engineering reports. Finally, a public hearing is conducted, which authorizes the levies on each year. The assessment amounts for the properties within the district have been static since at least 1997. And so that really underscores some of the points I'm going to make in the subsequent slides about how purchasing power has really eroded. But first, let's talk about what the funds are used for. And specifically, it's really a large urban tree canopy. The trees are trimmed. Also, there's complete maintenance done on some of the street side landscaping and the medians, and then pest control for the same areas. And what do these activities do? Well, they keep the neighborhoods desirable. Obviously, South Melrose and the Shadow Ridge area are a great part of the city. Temperatures are moderated from it. They do reduce noise, and because they are irrigated, it helps with fire risk. Next slide. Again, while the revenues have been static, the improvements within the district have not. When it was formed back in 1989, there were about 500 trees, and today we're saying in excess of 1,100 here. I think the count from our public works staff is 1,167. So it's more than doubled, and this additional revenue would really provide that urban forestry funding that is desperately needed, as well as maintaining the landscaping within the districts, provide an opportunity to use lower water use landscaping and facilities for that, as well as improve some of the median landscapes and the one appurtenant area that's highlighted here, which is the northwest corner at South Melrose and Mountain Pass Circle. And it's an important element that we should talk about is establishing a district reserve. And when we get to some of the numbers over the last several years, we'll see how that's sort of delayed the condition that we're in now, but why it's useful in the future if this were approved. And so currently this project has had a number of steps to date. The funding issue was originally identified when we were doing our biannual budget process back last spring, when we realized that in year 2 of our 2-year operating budget, this district was going to go into deficit. We knew as part of our annual assessment process, we need to let council know. And when we let them know, they gave us direction to issue a request for proposal to contract with an assessment engineering consultant. Staff did complete that RFP in the summer of 2023, and in the fall, council did approve the agreement with NBS. And so that's about where we're at. We've been collecting data, and we're now ready to present it to you tonight. So this slide's important for a couple of reasons. The part on the right is just simply an existing diagram of the district. But more importantly, on the left side, we see here the district's fund balance over time since 2018. And as we can see, it goes from in excess of $81,000 to, it's hard to see on the schematic a little bit, but we estimate at this point, at the end of fiscal ending 2024, we will be in deficit by about $1,500. So it's, you can tell by the slope that the financial condition of this district is eroding rapidly. Next, this is simply a table form of that chart, and it's important to see the overall trends. The revenues are largely static, a little above or a little below $100,000 in that third column. Expenses are climbing over time. A note of the transfer in the current fiscal year, that $23,000, that is a part of the council approved integrated pest management program. That has a total price tag citywide of $385,000. South Melrose's portion of that program on an annual basis is $23,000. So with that, the net change here in this final year we see is almost $23,000 and gets us to that negative $1,500. This slide really provides sort of the why as to why we're talking about what we're talking about. Back in 1997, when Prop 218 was approved, and Sarah's going to speak more about that in just a minute, $100 was $100. Well, that same $100 today, or as of the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is December of 2023, you'd have to have almost $200. Specifically, you'd need $192.80 to have the same purchasing power. And so over time, the purchasing power erosion has been significant. You know, we look back at during the same time period, and minimum wage has gone from $5 to $16. It goes without saying the pandemic-related inflationary factors have been the most significant in 3 or 4 decades. And so this simply provides a viewpoint of what has happened to purchasing power over the last 2.5 decades. So our current annual levy, it levies about 1,359 parcels, and the aggregate amount is just over $100,000 here. We see the expense budget, the amended budget is $147,000. The original was $124,000. That extra $23,000 is for that IPM, the Integrated Pest Management Program I spoke about earlier. So this is really where we are. On the next slide, we can see kind of what the re-engineering highlights are. There's 2 primary things changing here, and I've spoken a lot about the need to increase the budget. This first point here, overall, the expense change, if this were approved, would move from about $124,000 to $226,000. That's an 82.3% increase. But the assessable expense change, which would be the assessable portion that would be applicable to private property owners, would increase from $124,000 to $208,000, which is just under a 68% increase. And again, for a point of reference, the Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation calculator showed over a similar time period that prices had increased by almost 93%. The other component of change, if you will, that's been necessitated by court cases in the last couple of decades is a revised method of assessment. The revision, if this new district were approved, would require the city to pay a general benefit amount of about $18,000 a year, and would require the city-owned parcels to be assessed to the tune of about $4,300 a year. So this isn't something that's entirely falling or at least being asked to fall on private property owners' shoulders. It's also something that the city would have to share in specifically. And in terms of the basis of assessment, I'm going to let Sarah get into that specifically, but it's really a shift from a sort of a legacy process called EDUs, or equivalent dwelling units, to benefit points. And so there's one more slide here, I think. So yeah, if this new proposal were not approved, what happens? It's a fair question. And the option is always lies with the private property owners like yourselves in the balloting process. But what would happen? 2 of the sort of options here are a reduced level of service. And as I said, the current level of funding is about $100,000. And we now know that the annual costs are going to be pretty close to $150,000, about $147,000 in today's numbers, with the addition of the IPM and the existing costs of servicing of the improvements. Another option, and this does happen in other districts in the city that are citywide, is an external funding source, specifically a general fund subsidy. That's something that the council would have to decide on and approve, and it's certainly something that will probably be talked about as these proceedings move forward. And with that, I'm going to hand off the specifics to Sarah to talk about our new assessment formula and the new proposed district.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here with you to talk a little bit about this potential replacement assessment district that we're considering. We'll talk through a couple of items in my presentation. First, we'll give you some legislative context. We'll talk about the process for an assessment increase. We'll look at the proposed district boundary and the proposed schedule. So give you some high-level information. We won't go too deep on all of the legal background and so forth here, but I do just want to point out the fact that Proposition 218 was approved by voters in 1996. And as Mike referred to in his presentation, that changed things related to assessments, which is what this type of charge is called. If you would like more information, you can read all about it in the Constitution, the state Constitution, which is its Articles 13C and D of the Constitution. But just real briefly, what this did was provide us with a proceeding by which the assessment has to go, the proceeding that the assessment has to go through in order to be increased. It's called a protest ballot proceeding. The city has no ability to charge more for these services right now without essentially asking the community for their permission to do so. So that's a really important piece here, that's why the city is engaged with you right now. And talking about the assessment, talking about the need for an increase, because your approval is a critical component. And it also set out the rules around the methodology and the analysis related to the assessment, and set requirements for the robust analysis that's included in the engineer's report. Next slide. So aside from the constitutional framework, we're operating within the context of the 1972 Act. That is literally what this act is called. It was approved by the legislature in 1972, and it has allowed for a mechanism for cities and other local agencies to fund maintenance and operations of parks, landscaping, street trees, traffic signals, lighting, etc. And so this is more specifically, in addition to the general assessment framework that the Constitution offers us, this is the very specific law that we are operating under. And again, if you like to read about these things, you can go to the Streets and Highways Code of the State of California, section 22500 and following. So what is a special assessment? A special assessment is a family of charges that are levied against a parcel of land related to the proportional special benefit that is generated by the underlying public service or improvement. Okay, so breaking that down a little bit further, this is an analysis has to be done to separate the general benefit to the public at large from these improvements from the special benefit that is conferred to the property being assessed. And that's the analysis that the engineer does in the engineer's report. Special assessments are approved by that protest ballot proceeding, and that is where each individual property owner would receive a ballot that shows the assessment amount for that parcel on that ballot, and you would have an opportunity to cast that ballot in favor or in opposition. Next slide. I won't read all of the information here, but just wanted to point out this does come from the 1972 Act, Landscape and Lighting Code, and it provides all of the detail as to what improvements are allowed to be funded under this particular statute. Next slide. So the process is very involved to form one of these landscape maintenance districts and levy the assessments. Initially, we look at data gathering, understanding the parcel data for each individual parcel within the district, understanding what the improvements are, what the cost of providing the services is. All of that information is gathered. From there, we do what we call the special benefit versus general benefit analysis, where based upon the improvements, the location of the improvements, the type of improvements, and based upon the property within the boundary of the district, which parcels receive special benefit as a result of these improvements, and what amount of that cost associated with the maintenance is attributable to general benefit. So that's where the engineer does that analysis. And once that analysis is completed, we prepare an engineer's report that supports the assessment. That's a fairly technical document that includes many components that are required by either the 1972 Act or the Constitution. And so it is, again, just a very robust analysis that includes factors such as trip generation and traffic analysis and so forth to come up with a methodology to calculate the assessments. In terms of the approval, the first city council meeting is where what we call the resolution of intention is considered. At that meeting, that's where the preliminary engineer's report is approved by city council preliminarily. And we order and call for the public hearing and ballot tabulation process. So at that time, we would say on, such and such date at such and such a time, this public hearing will be held, and please go ahead and mail those assessment ballots. Those ballots would be mailed to property owners at least 45 days before the public hearing, giving you ample opportunity to receive the ballot, read through the information included in the notice, and cast your ballot appropriately. You have up until the close of the public hearing to return that ballot so that it can be tabulated or counted in terms of the proceeding. Next slide. So a little bit more information here in terms of gathering the data. We're looking at the services, the cost, the boundary, and the property characteristics or the parcel data, looking at each individual parcel of land. Next slide. Special benefit versus general benefit is where we're identifying what benefits result from the improvements. So things like, in terms of identifying what is that specific benefit to property. So in this type of district, we're looking at things like the livability factor. Mike mentioned kind of that beautification or aesthetics of having all of the beautiful street trees and so forth. And then from there, we're separating the general benefit, which is benefit to the community at large versus that accruing to individual parcels. Next slide. We prepare that engineer's report, and there is a prescribed list of things that need to be included in that engineer's report pursuant to the various law. We have an assessment diagram, which is a map of the parcels in the district. We have a description of the improvements, a budget for the maintenance costs, detailed information around the method of assessment, and a listing of the proposed assessment by parcel. So every individual assessment would be included in that report. That first council meeting is that resolution of intention. Again, that sets the public hearing date and orders the mailing of the ballots. Next slide. Ballots are mailed at least 45 days prior to the public hearing date, and all property owners, again, this is a property owner proceeding, not a voter proceeding. So all property owners proposed to be assessed would have a ballot mailed to them, and they would have the opportunity to cast that ballot. Next slide. The city council would hold the public hearing, and following the close of the public hearing, the ballots would be tabulated. The ballots are weighted based on the assessment amount. So if my parcel happens to have a lower assessment amount, say my assessment is $1 and Mike has an assessment that is $10, that means his ballot is worth 10 times what my ballot is worth. And so one way to think about that is $1, one vote, essentially, so that parcels who are paying a larger share of the assessment, their ballot cast in favor or in opposition is weighted according to that assessment amount. So those are tabulated. If more than 50% of the proposed weighted assessments on ballots returned are in favor, then the city council may move forward with adoption of the resolution of formation and start collecting the assessment on the tax roll. Next slide. So this is the boundary of the district. I know that detail may be a little difficult for you to see. Hopefully this is, you're familiar with the geography here enough to see, where these boundaries are, and you can kind of see the green points are where the trees are located. There is some additional landscaping located in many of the areas kind of surrounding the trees as well. Next slide. In terms of the formation schedule, this is what we are proposing right now. We are at the point where we are finishing up the data gathering. We've done the special and general benefit analysis, and we have created a draft of the engineer's report. We would be looking to hold that first city council meeting in March of this year, and ballots would also be mailed. Then we would have that assessment ballot phase where those ballots are out in the world and property owners would have the opportunity to cast their ballot as well as ask questions. And then in May of this year, we would propose to have the public hearing where property owners would have the ability to come and address council, ask questions, hear and be heard at that hearing, and then the ballot tabulation would follow that. Next slide.
That is your final slide.
All right.
I did want to mention, thank you so much, Sarah. I did want to mention that we will have the product of some of that work that Sarah just reviewed for us in the form of an assessment calculator on the civicmic.com/Vista website in the coming days. If you sign up for updates, we will alert you as to when that is there on the website, so you don't have to try to remember to check for it. And you'll be able to see both your specific existing assessment amount and the proposed assessment amount to continue and improve the level of landscape maintenance services. And with that, we're going to move to questions, and we'll go back and forth between those who are online and those who called in. I do think we only actually have one person who called by phone. So for that one person, and there's no name there, just a partial phone number. If you want to unmute yourself and say your name when we're ready to start this, then we'll take your question. For everybody else, if you are here on Zoom, please raise your hand if you have a question by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and clicking raise hand, and I will call on you by whatever name is on your screen. I'm going to ask, please limit yourself to one question at a time. Just one question when it's your turn, so we can get to as many people as possible. And if you have another question, we'll try to get back to you. Okay, finally, we just ask that you express your personal views and not the views of others. And with that, the first hand up. Does anybody have a question?
Looks like Chris, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, my name is Chris. One question that I have, I know you mentioned that the engineering report will be a bit technical. Will that be available to the public either after or before the council meeting approval?
Absolutely, that is a public document for sure. And so it would be both part of the agenda package for the intent meeting. And then it required to be included in the notice that's mailed with the ballot would be a summary of the engineer's report as well. So there would be additional information there.
And Krista will also be available on the civicmic.com/Vista website probably next week. Again, if you're signed up for updates, we will, or if you RSVP to this meeting, then we'll send you an email so that you know it's there. And I see Judy Furman. Judy, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, actually, this is Judy's husband, Ernie. And the question was already asked about the engineer's report and where to access it.
Great.
Really interested to seeing, the areas of growth in terms of the trees that, were stated 500 to over 1,000. So hopefully the report will have that kind of information in it. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Stephanie Jackal's hand up. Stephanie, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate this presentation, and my question is, how do I sign up for the update?
That is an excellent question. There is a slide up on the screen right now with the website civicmic.com/Vista. And if you go there, you can sign up for updates, and you'll be sure to receive everything that all the new information as this process unfolds.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We also encourage you to share that website with your neighbors and encourage them to also sign up for updates. We'd love to have as much input as possible. I still see hand up by Judy. Did you have a second question for Judy's husband to ask? No. Okay.
Oh, sorry about that. I need
No,
to bring the hand down.
that's okay. No
Okay.
problem.
Yeah, I was, there was a second question, but I can maybe email that or something.
Oh, feel free to ask it. I don't see other hands up at the moment.
Okay. I was just thinking about as far as there was another meeting that you mentioned, February 28th. Is that meeting in person going to sort of go over the same topics, or is that an opportunity to sort of give feedback after information is provided?
Exactly. Yes, it'll be an in-person meeting for anyone who may have missed that on Wednesday, February 28th. I believe it's the start time at 6 p.m. We'll be mailing all property owners an invitation to that, so look for that. That invitation will go out in the mail next week. And yes, you will have the opportunity to hear. It will be more of a workshop, so you'll have an opportunity to speak directly one-on-one with folks from the city, as well as to look specifically at, we'll have the rates there at the meeting as well. So if people haven't had a chance to look online, they can learn what their existing rate is and what the proposed rate would be at that meeting, and ask questions, and there'll be other information offered. So keep an eye out for that invitation in the mail. I see a hand up by, oh, thank you. I see a hand up by China Langer.
Hi, good evening. I was wondering if there was some more background you could provide on why the costs have increased so significantly since 2018.
Let
Yeah,
Mike handle it.
Yeah, I can speak to that. A lot of it has to do with wages, and water is another one. Let me grab my budget here. I can say, looking at the proposed budget versus the current one, there's a significant increase in both the landscape maintenance costs, and that's just simply a reflection of the West Turf, which is the contractor who provides those services, contract extension with them that goes through June 30th of 2026. And then the bigger change in terms of old amount to new amount is as I said, the tree maintenance. Right now, we are really just sort of in a reactive mode. It's a very small line item, about $3,500 in the current structure, and in the proposed structure, it's actually $40,000, because with close to 1,200 trees, the schedule would call for 100 trees to be trimmed per year, so that each tree is trimmed every 4 years. And that cost is right around $100 per tree with our existing contract with West Coast Arborists. So those two are large items as well. As I said, I don't have the trend on water, but I know all of us as Southern California residents can speak to since 2018, water rates have gone up dramatically, specifically because of the droughts that preceded 2018 to the current times.
Thanks, Mike.
I just briefly wanted to add to that, just for the larger context, that our firm works with communities throughout the state in this area of looking at assessment increases, and just wanted to anecdotally add that we have seen landscaping contractor prices triple since 2020. Across the board, across the state. So just kind of adding that context to the overall conversation, that we're seeing this all over. And you are not the only community who is looking at an assessment increase as a result of some of those increased contractor prices.
Thanks, Sarah. Chris, I see your hand up.
Yes. My question was, sorry, I was attentive to that one. Yes, for in terms of watering the trees, if it, I don't know if it'll be provided in the engineering report. Is it all fresh water that the maintenance of all of these, both trees, bushes, and everything that is being used, or is there currently the city have any recycled water or any reusable water that is implemented to maintain this landscaping?
That's a great question, Chris. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I
Sure.
will say at our meeting that's in person on February 28th, we will have public works staff there that can directly address it. If I had to guess, because of the age of the district, on the
Mhm.
fact that recycled water, quite frankly, really wasn't a thing in the late 80s when the water lines were installed, I would guess no, but we can get that definitively answered at that in-person meeting in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And Chris, if you cannot join that in-person meeting, just feel free to email that question to us and we'll make sure to get an answer to you. I did also want to add that, and I know Mike briefly touched on this, but some of the intended improvements to the continued maintenance include lower water using plants to replace ones that are, not a little too thirsty. So I think that's part of the plan too. Other questions? Seeing none, would any of our presenters like to add anything else?
Rochelle, I
Before we
think Chris
close
has
out?
another question. I see his hand up.
Oh, go right ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Just gave a moment to see if there was anybody else. My question was, sorry, again, distracted. Sorry, I think you'll have to come back to me. I blanked out. Sorry.
It happens to us all, don't worry.
Rochelle, I
see
think before we
China.
take,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Danielle.
I was just going to say before we take another question, I think Sarah had another couple slides she wanted to share that would be helpful for this group. So if she can go ahead and share her screen there.
Yep, 1 second. I have a little bit more information. Let me go ahead and pull that up. But I need someone to let me share my screen.
I'm sure John would be happy to let you share your screen.
You should be able to now.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to give you just maybe a little bit more detail just based on kind of where the questions were going in terms of the special benefits that we've identified. And so, we are looking at the improved aesthetics and increased livability. And then just in terms of how that special benefit is allocated to each individual parcel in the district. Of course, there are multiple land uses. You have the residential area, but also the primarily industrial area as well. So just thinking about, how to relate those parcels. Obviously, something like a flat rate per parcel is not necessarily an appropriate methodology. So we've looked at land use and lot square footage, as well as, the fact that the residential property is in a it is in a neighborhood, and so you could see on the map that showed the trees, there were a lot more trees sort of throughout the neighborhood area. So I wanted to go through the calculation. We talked about separating the general benefit from the special benefit. Of the total budget we've identified, we're looking at just over 9% of that total cost being related to general benefit. And so again, that's an amount that is not charged to the properties being assessed, but it is an amount that would be funded by the city's general fund. So looking at the overall budget for the services, the total budget itself is for the maintenance costs, it is just over $200,000. There are some administrative costs related to placing the levy on the tax roll and so forth, as well as a little bit of funding that would go towards reserves and give the district the ability to make needed repairs or replacement of landscape material, that sort of thing. Just, really ensuring that the district was set up appropriately to be able to provide maintenance in the long term. So the total cost is this $226,000. Again, we talked about that general benefit component. That's that 9%. So the $18,000 number here, that's the amount that the city would contribute under the new district. Because the old district was formed prior to Proposition 218, the city, other than the amount Mike mentioned earlier in his presentation, the city is contributing nothing relative to the general benefit. The total dollar amount to be assessed is just over $208,000. So this is a lot of math. I promise this is as complicated as the math gets. But we are essentially taking all of the parcels in the district, assigning points to each of those parcels based on the land use, the lot size, the neighborhood factor, et cetera, to come up with a total number of special benefit points assigned to each parcel. And then we take that total dollar amount, that cost to be assessed, this $208,000 we just saw, which is net of the general benefit. We divide that by the special benefit points in the district as a whole, and we come up with a maximum assessment rate per special benefit point of just under $60. So then each individual parcel, and this is what Rochelle mentioned earlier, that this would be available on CivicMic, you'll be able to go and see how many points are assigned to your individual parcel so that you can see that calculation and see what your total assessment is. In general, we're looking at an average for most single-family residential parcels of $135. This is an annual amount. And again, this is something that's placed on your tax roll, just like the current assessment that you might have noticed that line item on your tax bill. Condos, the average is $9. And you can see there's a variety. There's a much bigger range, of course, for the more commercial industrial parcels based on the size of the property, but these are the average amounts. And we also wanted to note that publicly owned parcels are not exempt from the assessment. And so that means that the city actually owns, in addition to that general benefit contribution we talked about, the city owns property that totals about $4,300 worth of assessment that they would be paying. And I think that's it in terms of additional information that I wanted to share.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I just want to point out those numbers that Sarah was mentioning, those are annual numbers. That's an annual assessment. I see a hand up. China Langer, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering what sort of the future projected parcel growth is for this district and how that's being taken into consideration in the cost.
Mike and Sarah, I had a hard time hearing that question.
Yeah, China, could you repeat the question? I couldn't hear you.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I was wondering kind of what the future growth within this district is and how, in terms of number of parcels, and how that is being taken into consideration in the cost estimates moving forward.
Yeah, at this point, it's largely built out, obviously, and you could say that for the city as a whole. You know, there are no large buildable tracts within the city. So outside of there being, you know, some sort of demolition of a current or older building and then it being rebuilt and then having the method of assessment applied to the then new building, there probably wouldn't be a lot of parcel changes that I would anticipate.
Chris, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. My question was, I remember correctly, one of the slides we talked about the ballot and voting, and then we also discussed just now in the last slides about distributing points based on benefits and or whatever else for the parcel. Would this in turn mean for some lot, whether it be commercial, probably commercial having the more square footage, totaling up to more benefit points and thus more of a weighted or a stronger vote in the ballot? Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, I think that's a good general understanding that if you have more benefit points, then you would have more points times the $59 rate per benefit point and therefore a higher assessment amount. And then therefore your assessment would be weighted accordingly. So it is true that some of the very large commercial or industrial properties would have a higher assessment amount, especially relative to a single family residential property.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other questions? Seeing none, any other additional comments by any of our presenters?
Rochelle, it looks like
Chris?
Chris's hand is up again. Did you have another question, Chris?
I did. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. I
it's all right.
apologize. I thought you just had forgotten to put it down.
Yeah, I do see that it can happen like that. Do we know currently, or are we waiting until after the engineering report is complete, how many of the maintenance area, trees, everything are currently residential versus commercial properties right now or near that?
So we're not specifically assigning particular improvement areas or particular trees or particular landscape areas to
That's
the
right. Yeah.
to the commercial or what have you. In terms of, I think that the question maybe, and let me know if I'm framing it incorrectly, but more along the lines of what percentage of the total assessment is attributable to residential versus non-residential. And based on your prior question, I'm, just, again, I'm putting words in your mouth, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but, just kind of going down that line, looking at, what does that dynamic look like as it relates to the ballot proceeding? So I would actually have to calculate that for you just in terms of what those total percentages are, but that is certainly information we can either add to the CivicMic site or be prepared to address on February 28th, that in-person meeting.
Thank you. I believe that was accurate. I think what I was seeing was that, or thinking rather, was that a certain parcel would have received so many special benefit points or just benefit points in general, as compared to a different parcel, and that weighing differently, of course, in their votes, just because I think the impact could be different to a commercial unit versus a residential unit, electricity cost savings, whatever that might be. So. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Great questions. Anybody else for coming to the end of our hour? Well, thank you, everybody. We hope this has been a helpful presentation for everybody this evening. And again, the contact information, in addition to the website, feel free to reach out to us by phone or email, or even mail if you would like, to ask questions that come up while you're ruminating about all of the information you heard this evening. We hope we'll see you on February 28th, and look for that invite in the mail. And also, I just wanted to mention the city has you know, if you have specific questions that are related to your property that has to do with landscaping that the city is responsible for that impacts your property in any way, there is an email address up on the screen to report that, any concerns or questions with regard to that. And with that, I'd like to just wish you all a peaceful and wonderful rest of your evening.